friends. And so that's where our journey started. We had to make new friends, and on top of that, we also moved from city to city almost every year. So we start at one school, make new friends, and then their jobs would be changed to a different location in the country, sometimes even within the same city, but that means that we have to move to a different area and start at a different school. So almost every year, until we were about 13 years old, we were making new friends constantly. And as a parent now, we kind of think through what that means for our children if we had to do that. And it's not something that we would necessarily want to have for the kids, but the one thing that it taught myself and my younger sister was the ability to adjust to any new environment. And that's a very important skill for you youngsters particularly to be able to adopt. Is any environment that you're thrust into, you need to very quickly adjust yourself to that particular environment. And in adjusting to that new environment, one, you have to make new friends. Two, you have to learn new habits. Three, you might have to start eating different foods. That was one of the biggest adjustments coming to England. The food here is terrible. So, going from delicious Indian food to quite bland food where literally the only flavoring is salt, and if you're lucky, maybe pepper as well. That was one of the big adjustments, especially when we were at school. At home, of course, we had delicious Indian cooking. But these are the kind of things that you have to adjust to. Why this is an important skill set is because we live in a world that's constantly changing. And change will be thrust upon you whether you choose it or not. Even if you stay in Thane for the rest of your life. Yeah? Now there's a saying which is a little cliched actually, but it's very true, which is change is the only constant. Right? And it is. Change is the only constant. So your life will continue to change because technology changes, the environment changes, people change, leaders change, desires change, ambitions change, aspirations change, populations change. And with all that change that's thrust on you, if you can adjust to that very rapidly and make the most of your circumstances and environment, you will always stand out. And this is the one message that I will say is an important skill set for all of you to develop. And it's something that, because change was a constant in our lives growing up, it's something that's become a little bit of a habit for me growing up as well. So when I graduated from university, so at university, here it's the norm in England that when you go to university at the age of 18, usually you leave the house and you go to a city and you kind of live in that city and sort of start, rather than stay with your parents and commute into university. So I moved to a completely new city. But because of the upbringing that we had, where we kept on changing the environment, I was able to adjust to it very, very quickly. So much so that the people who were my roommates, my colleagues, they weren't used to it. I was the one who found us a property to live in, contacted the electricity board to get us connected to electricity, water, all the utilities that we needed to, the council tax that we needed to pay, all the furniture that needed to be put into the house. I was able to sort it out within the space of a few days because it's just something that I'd experienced growing up. That was the first time where actually I saw tangible evidence of the benefits of this constant change that we thrust upon ourselves. Growing up and having that change was frustrating. As you can imagine, to have to keep making new friends every time was frustrating. But once I switched to university, all of a sudden there was this glimmer that, well, because of this environment, all of a sudden now, myself and my sister have got a skill set that very few people actually have. And then that became a little addictive. So when at university, the degree I did was, I studied Japanese and business management. So I did a dual degree, learned the language Japanese. After graduating, I said to myself, you know what? This getting yourself out of your comfort zone is addictive. Yeah? And that's my second message to you. One is, change is a constant, learn to live with it, don't complain, adjust. The second message is, always push yourself out of your comfort zone. The moment you get comfortable, and you know that you're getting comfortable, that's when you know you have to force yourself to change. Because that's the only way you're going to improve and get better. So after graduating, I could have done the normal thing, which is apply for a job, come move to London, work at a bank or work at a management consultancy, do the typical job route, get married, have kids, have a nice, 4-bedroom house with a garden and continue to live life like that, which is what most of my friends did. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something that was just completely different. So while I was at university, I used to run a business. I used to buy and sell second-hand furniture. That's how I was able to fund my time at university. And then eBay came along at that time. So instead of now going to physical auctions and buying furniture and physically moving things, I was doing it all online. And I was buying and selling goods and items there. Whatever money I had saved from that, running that business, I invested in a plane ticket to Japan. And I said to myself, I'm going to find a job. I had only enough money to last for 2 weeks in Japan. And in that 2 weeks, I had to make the most of my time there. So before I moved to Tokyo, before I went there, I applied to about 50 different companies to find out if I could get a job in Japan. All 50 came back saying no. All 50 came back saying no. Still, I said, you know what? Let me get there and let me call them again, telling them that I'm there and see if I could force a meeting. So I contacted all 50 companies again. When I got to Tokyo, all of them said no. And again, that was the sort of environment of rejection that I was facing. But despite that, I said, let's try some new companies I haven't yet approached. And eventually, I'm going to cut a long story short, that's a whole chapter unto itself. But on the very last day, I was very lucky to sit down with an entrepreneur who, after speaking with me for half an hour, said, okay, Rohit, I want you to work for me. And I said, okay, well, what's the job? And he said, I want you to start developing websites. And I said to him, I have no experience in programming. I did a degree in business management and Japanese language. So why are you offering me a job to develop websites? And he said to me, Ambeka-san, you're Indian. It's in your blood. And he pulled out a book on HTML and he gave it to me and he said to me, read this book while your visa is being processed. And once that's done, come and work for me. And so I took the job. I was offered, by the way, so that you know, I was offered 4 jobs on that trip after a lot of persistence. 3 of them were teaching English. If you know anything about Japan, teaching English is a very lucrative profession. It actually pays more than I would have gotten working at a top 4 accountancy firm here, or even a bank, a starting salary. They pay much more just for teaching English. But I was determined I'm not going to go to Japan as an English teacher, because every other foreigner does that. I said, I don't care if I get less, but I want to get into something that's going to enhance my skill set. So I was offered the role of becoming a programmer in Tokyo. Then I got into another field, which was recruitment. Essentially, I was finding people for companies. And I started to have a degree of success in that field. The moment I started to have success, and it started to get easy and comfortable, that's when I said to myself, I have to now move myself out of this comfort zone. And the reason for that was because my first boss taught me a very important lesson. She was the one who actually told me that anytime you get into your comfort zone, that's the point at which you've got to tell yourself to change. Otherwise, you'll peak, then you'll stagnate, and then you'll have no market value afterwards. Yeah? You have to get yourself out of your comfort zone, even if you have to start again from the bottom, work hard, learn something new, and then you'll widen your skill set, widen your perspective, and become a more marketable individual. So I got very comfortable, and I decided I have to change now, get myself out of the comfort zone. And so I told my company I want to move to London, a completely new market. Eventually they agreed, they moved me to London, and it was a totally different market. And again, I was very uncomfortable because you have to build new relationships and start again from the bottom, but I was ready to do that. And then again, after a year, it got very comfortable. I said, okay, now I need to move away from London. So then they said, okay, well, we've got a role for you in Hong Kong. It's a slightly different role, and you have to run North Asia. So I said, okay, let's do that. So I moved to North Asia, but this time to Hong Kong instead of Tokyo. And while I was there, all this time I started, I was in recruitment, I was working my way up the value chain, and I was dealing with board and C-level executives, the very senior level positions in technology and private equity. And at that stage, I got to a stage where I said, you know what, even if I move to another geography, it's too easy now. It's become musical chairs for me. I used to know who was going to leave because they would confide in me and they'd say, listen, Roy, I'm about to take another, and knowing that that person was going to leave, I would talk to the chairman of the board and say, listen, if you ever need to find a new CEO, come and talk to me. Within a week, their CEO would resign and I'd get a call from the chairman of the board saying, we need a new CEO, can you help us? It was literally that easy after a while. So I said, how do I now get myself out of the comfort zone? So I decided to leave the industry and do something completely different. And so that something completely different was starting up my own software company. So I decided, let me start up my own software company and move geography at the same time. So move from then Hong Kong to Singapore. That was a little bit more of a personal choice because my daughter was just born there in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is not the kind of place where you would raise a young baby. It's very much like being in the heart of New York or living here in central London. It's not very kid friendly. So, baby friendly that is. Once they're a little older, it's different. But that's when I decided to move to Singapore, which is very kid friendly. So moved to Singapore, quit my job, and decided to start up a software company. Started up a software company, raised money for it, did everything that an entrepreneur shouldn't do. But I learned a lot out of that, and all the failures and all the mistakes that I made, there was a lot of learning that came. It was a very uncomfortable time, but out of that came many, many things which in today's role, fast forward 8 years, in today's role, in the new role that I'm in now, I can deploy and apply with confidence. So getting out of your comfort zone is something that you should always push yourself for. It's counterintuitive. And most people will tell you you're crazy to do it. Yeah? But that's why you got to think to yourself that if you want to stand out, you always have to do something different. You always have to do something that is not what everybody else is doing. That's the only way you're going to stand out. And for that, it takes risk. And that's number 3. Take risks in your life. I'm not saying life-threatening risks. Yeah? Don't go out onto the middle of the road and play chicken. I can cross it before the bus hits me. None of that nonsense. Take calculated risks. But sometimes you have to do that. You have to stick your neck out. You have to be the one that is different. And you have to be the one that goes against the grain. And again, don't do it for the sake of doing it. Do it when it compromises your beliefs. If you have a belief system, if you have a view, if you have an opinion, and if there's something inside of you that tells you that this is the right way to go, even if the grain of society, if your peers, your colleagues, everybody is telling you to do something else, you have to have the courage of your convictions at that stage to make sure that you take the risk. Yeah? And this is a very important thing because without risk, there is no reward. It's a basic equation of life. No risk, no reward. And by the way, the nature of risk is there may be zero reward. Right? It's a two-sided coin. You take a risk, you might not get a reward at all. Yeah? But then, you can't let that get you down. You have to pick up and go back again. Just like I did. 50 companies, all 50 said no. I could have given up. But I didn't. I carried on because in my mind, I was telling myself, I will get something. It's just a question of persistence and not allowing things to get me down. On this, I've got an analogy actually, something that just happened today. It's very interesting because it sort of reinforced in my own mind this whole idea of persistence and going that extra mile. So I was on the tube and I was sitting at one end of a carriage and I don't know if you've seen it in London, but the people who play musical instruments, the buskers, they came onto the train. They came onto the train and they started playing at one end of the train. And what happened was, they were playing at one end of the train and before it reached the next station, one of the three, the trio, would walk down with a hat and basically get money from people. And the guy who was sitting next to me, he brought out a handful of coins. And he had it like this, ready to give. Now I watched the person, he came, and he almost made it to us, but he gave up because nobody gave any money. He stopped at that point, and then he turned back around and went that way. And this guy with his handful of coins put it back in his pocket. Don't be that busker.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Great experience.